But these people who are using Bitcoin to undermine authoritarianism, some of these other countries that are undergoing hyperinflation, they really need Bitcoin. And you could wake up as them tomorrow. You probably want to wake up in the Bitcoin world. One of the reasons that we launched the Bitcoin Research Institute was as an understanding of this phenomenon, that there just aren't enough academics that are interested in Bitcoin. And despite being 70% or so of the market cap of all of crypto, we wonder whether maybe Satoshi looked at things like the World Cup and the Olympics and US presidential elections. If a halving comes around every 4 years, people are going to be talking about it in the lead up to it. It's going to drive interest. And Bitcoin is going to have these cycles of interest that follow the halving cycles. Kind of like, I'm not watching any swimming right now, but when the Olympics comes around, I'm going to watch swimming. It only happens every 4 years, and it's interesting. That's sort of the philosophical framework that we suggest people use when they're thinking through Bitcoin, and then go through all these steps. How does Bitcoin's monetary policy affect all these people? How does the privacy affect all these people?
For the few people that don't know you, give us some background, who you are, and why you're excited about Bitcoin.
Sure. I'm Bradley Rettler. I teach philosophy at the University of Wyoming. And as of July, I will be the inaugural director of the Bitcoin Research Institute here. And I also wrote a book with two co-authors, Resistance Money, A Philosophical Case for Bitcoin, which is an academic book, but is designed to be able to be accessible to anyone who's interested in some of the philosophical issues related to Bitcoin and a philosophical framework to think it through. I'm also a senior fellow at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. And I think the thing that excites me about Bitcoin is the same thing that excited me about Bitcoin when I first heard about it over a decade ago, which is just the potential of Bitcoin to remove middlemen in things like international remittances, where Western Union and MoneyGram are taking percentages, or in over-the-counter transactions where credit card companies and payment processors are taking percentages, and to even remove people playing other roles in the monetary system, like creating money and distributing it in whatever way they see fit, and holding on to your money for you and granting you access to it at their whims. So I see Bitcoin as allowing people to take back the power that has been grabbed by a lot of people in the related to or adjacent to money.
Interesting. And there the resistant money term also is coming from your book, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. So the case in the book is that Bitcoin is primarily valuable to people who don't have access to better money. And sometimes that's because the monetary rule that they live under is corrupt, and Bitcoin allows you to resist that corruption. And sometimes it's just incompetent, and you don't have to trust people who you think are incompetent. You have this alternative. And if you think that your money is better than Bitcoin, then you can choose that, and you don't have to get involved with Bitcoin. You don't have to use it or hold any of it. But it is there as an option for people who think that it's better. And so because it's opt-in and allows you these different choices, it's good.
It's super interesting that, and I have the same conclusion, that Bitcoin is best for the people that need it the most. But then it's interesting that USA is now really steaming ahead with the national policies. And then I'm like, I don't know, USA should be the last country to really get Bitcoin for some reason.
Yeah, I'm not sure that a lot of people in the USA really get Bitcoin. Even the people that are pushing some of these Bitcoin bills and regulations. One of the things that's interesting about Bitcoin is that there are so many different aspects of it that you can get. And so a lot of books about Bitcoin just focus on monetary policy. And it's like a better version of gold. It's gold, but it's more divisible and it's more transactable. And they don't understand the censorship resistance and the privacy and peer-to-peer, and none of that stuff even really matters to them. It's just gold was great, and so Bitcoin is great for the same reasons. So yeah, I think you can understand that and think that Bitcoin is valuable and still not get the full picture of what Bitcoin offers. If you tell the story of Bitcoin through gold, you get that. If you tell the story of Bitcoin through cypherpunks, then you get a very different understanding of Bitcoin, that you might not even care that much about the supply cap, the 21 million, the predictable issuance schedule. You just see this native digital cash that you can transact peer-to-peer relatively privately and think, oh, that's great. I don't even care what the underlying asset is. It's this protocol that lets me do these transactions that's really valuable. So it's fascinating to me how many different aspects of Bitcoin there are to understand.
It's like there's so many different cases. Like you have the philosophical case for Bitcoin, but there's so many different cases and so many different perspectives on Bitcoin, how you can explain it to someone else. And it also, I like, I mean, it is a good point, just because there is now a president of in America that is talking about it and doing some policies around that, doesn't mean the USA has the biggest grassroots adoption. I think Nigeria and those places are probably higher, especially when we look at Bitcoin from a medium of exchange side and not just from a store of value. But yeah, it's that bottom up approach that Bitcoin is strong for. I mean, even if a politician adopts it, it's still bottom up, because he only adopts it because he sees that it's popular and that it's something that the people want. So even like if a politician does it, like Trump didn't do it because he's like, oh, like I love Bitcoin. No, like people pushed the idea of Bitcoin to him, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And he started talking about it maybe for political reasons or electoral reasons. If he has any, he has it because he thinks that it's going to increase in value. But him having it helps the people in Nigeria who are using it as a medium of exchange. The more people that want it, the more the value of it goes up. And so the more valuable their Bitcoin is. I like that.
I'm super interested in it because I don't see a lot of people from academia, like professors, teachers, coming in Bitcoin. I think we had, I don't know the profession of all the 500 guests that have been on the show, but on top of my head, I know 3 teachers that have been on, teachers or professors. What is that just me, or is there like a lack of education in Bitcoin, especially in academia?
Yeah, it's not just you. There are some economists who are interested in it and have been for a while. I think Will Luther published an academic paper on Bitcoin in 2011. That's the earliest one that I know of or have cited. There's a lot in computer science. It's tapered off quite a bit as Bitcoin gets less interesting and other crypto projects capture the minds of people in computer science. And also, there's financial incentives to work on other things. Any crypto project that has a foundation or a leader or a pre-mine or an ICO or something like that can pay for graduate students. They can pay for postdocs. They can even give grants to professors to work on their specific project. So these more centralized projects are able to recruit more people to work on them because they can pay them to do that. One of the reasons that we launched the Bitcoin Research Institute was as an understanding of this phenomenon, that there just aren't enough academics that are interested in Bitcoin. And despite being 70% or so of the market cap of all of crypto, Bitcoin gets much less attention in these academic journals. And it's, I think, because of the structure. So we wanted to incentivize people to work on Bitcoin through offering article prizes and conferences, things like that. There's also, in addition to the monetary effects, there's, I think, 2 other aspects that mean that academics aren't getting as into Bitcoin. One is just inertia. You tend to work on what your supervisor in graduate school worked on. And most supervisors for students who are in grad school are in their 50s and 60s, and they worked on what their supervisor worked on. And so it's hard for new things like Bitcoin to break in and be something that you can write a dissertation on. A lot of advisors will just say, I can't competently advise you on that. And so you can't find anyone, even if you are interested in Bitcoin, to work on it. And then there's almost a social stigma, at least in some fields, against working on things related to money. And then especially something like Bitcoin, which I think its opponents has successfully labeled as a right-wing phenomenon. There was this really bad book that came out almost 10 years ago now called Bitcoin, Software as Right-Wing Extremism. And it tries to trace this libertarian history of Bitcoin and guilt by association Bitcoin with all these other figures. And, anyone who knows about Bitcoin knows that there are probably an outsized percentage of libertarians who are interested in it compared to, other things. On the other hand, the story of the cypherpunks is not a purely libertarian story. There were some left-wing socialist radicals who were cypherpunks who you imagine would laud Bitcoin for different reasons. But so I think because academia is traditionally left-leaning and because Bitcoin has successfully been painted as right-wing, people are scared to work on it because they don't want to be perceived to be a member of that political tribe.
Yeah, it's super interesting how Bitcoin itself isn't political, but of course the people involved in Bitcoin can be political, and there's like a tendency towards different directions. But for me, I mean, I'm a libertarian, but like Bitcoin can be such a social thing. It's like there's no discrimination. Like everyone can have the same access to Bitcoin. There's a lot of social ideas in Bitcoin. If you take out the idea of communism, like, hey, we need central banks that controls everything. We have to plan the economy. But there's a lot of social fairness and social ideas in Bitcoin. And one also interesting point is, I don't remember who coined it or who said that, but I heard a lot Satoshi brought science back into money. Before it was just kind of pseudo science money, and now there's like real science. It's like with proof of work, and it connects to energy. It's engineered money. It's the engineering of money. So from a logical perspective, maybe that's just my Bitcoin classes on. From a logical perspective, academia and science should be super excited about having something like Bitcoin, where all of a sudden it's not 5 people that decide monetary policy. It's it's a consensus. It's mathematics that's kind of decides what money is.
Yeah, I mean, I have sat in on some monetary theory classes here at the University of Wyoming, and I think there's a lot of science and a lot of math involved in standard economics, non-Bitcoin Keynesian. I mean, there's a shift at some point into this purely mathematical model. And in fact, the Austrian school was a group who was trying to do less math and more sort of a priori thinking about what money should be, and like telling others, you can't just go based on these mathematical models. You have to understand human psychology and how people think about money, and how, say, creating new money not just affects the money supply, which is a number, but also affects the way people think about money. So, I mean, there's certainly a lot of science and engineering that goes into Bitcoin. I think, so the solution to the Byzantine generals problem is a very mathematically heavy and computer science-y puzzle. But I think there's also an understanding of game theory and incentive structures and human psychology. We wrote this, my co-authors of the book and I wrote an op-ed on the halving, where we wonder whether maybe Satoshi looked at things like the World Cup and the Olympics and US presidential elections, all of which happen every 4 years and get all this fanfare, and thought, if a halving comes around every 4 years, people are going to be talking about it in the lead up to it. It's going to drive interest, and Bitcoin is going to have these cycles of interest that follow the halving cycles. Kind of like, I'm not watching any swimming right now, but when the Olympics comes around, I'm going to watch swimming, which I never do because it only happens every 4 years and it's interesting. So in addition to all of this, I think putting together of classical computer science parts together in a brand new way, Satoshi also added a lot of understanding of social science and psychology and things like that.
It's super interesting. I mean, it's an obvious question maybe for you, but what how would you describe the philosophy behind Bitcoin?
That's a good question. And in the book, we give a philosophical case for Bitcoin, but we don't try to give a philosophy of Bitcoin. Other people have tried to do that. And I think that there's just too much that you could, there are too many philosophical reasons that you could like Bitcoin. From being right libertarian to being left libertarian, to issues about justice and democracy, social cohesion. So what we try to do instead is give a philosophical framework for thinking about Bitcoin that also can be applied to other things. It's the philosophical framework offered by John Harsanyi, who's an economist, and then later John Rawls, who was a philosopher. And they use it to think about governments and economic principles and things like that. And it's called the veil of ignorance. So the idea is that you imagine you go to sleep tonight, and when you wake up in the morning, you have no idea which person on earth you're going to be. And there's an equal chance that you could be anyone. So there's roughly a 1 in 8 billion chance that you wake up as you. There's a 1 in 8 billion chance that you wake up as me. There's a 1 in 8 billion chance that you wake up as Donald Trump. There's a 1 in 8 billion chance that you wake up as a particular farmer in China. And the question is, if you didn't know who you'd be when you woke up tomorrow, would you want to wake up in a world with Bitcoin or a world without Bitcoin? And this is supposed to get you past a lot of the self-interested reasons that you might be in favor of Bitcoin or in favor of a particular political system that maybe you benefit from. And Rawls thought that this way of thinking promoted this idea of making sure that the people who are the worst off still have enough to survive. So you'd want to make sure that no matter who you woke up as, you weren't going to die of starvation that day because you didn't have enough food. And so you'd want, of course, people to be able to get really wealthy if they worked really hard and were really geniuses or made good decisions or even got lucky. But you'd also want to make sure that everyone was taken care of. And so we sort of think a similar thing about Bitcoin. The people who are benefiting from Bitcoin, especially as a medium of exchange, are people who don't have other options. They don't have access to the US dollar. They don't have access to stock markets. They don't have access to any store of value that's better than Bitcoin. And we've all seen Bitcoin, crash 92% sometimes. And so if you're in a position where that's the best thing that you have, then you're certainly going to want to wake up in a world that has it. And so there are a lot more people who would be harmed waking up in a non-Bitcoin world than people who would be harmed waking up in a Bitcoin world. There are people who've lost a lot of money on Bitcoin. There are people who have staked their reputation on Bitcoin going to zero or being worthless. They're just a much smaller amount of people. And they're not that harmed. Paul Krugman is slightly harmed every day that Bitcoin succeeds because for 10 years he's been saying that it's worthless. But he's not that harmed. He's still very financially secure. But these people who are using Bitcoin to undermine authoritarianism in, let's say, Zimbabwe or some of these other countries that are undergoing hyperinflation, they really need Bitcoin. And you could wake up as them tomorrow. So you'd probably want to wake up in the Bitcoin world. That's sort of the philosophical framework that we suggest people use when they're thinking through Bitcoin, and then go through all these steps. How does Bitcoin's monetary policy affect all these people? How does the privacy affect all these people? And so on.
I never heard that, and that's so brilliant. I really love that because it shows, like it takes out the ego. And if you really have the choice of, hey, I want to wake up tomorrow and it's not sure who I wake up to, like it's literally 8 billion people and I could wake up as anyone. Do I want to wake up in a completely fiat world or do I want to wake up in a complete Bitcoin world? If I wake up maybe in a fiat world and if I'm the wrong person, maybe I don't have access to money, because fiat not everyone has access to, and how do I get by this day? But if I know I wake up in a Bitcoin world and I know 100% certainty I have access somehow to Bitcoin, that's a way better world. It's like even if you start as the unluckiest, worst off person from all those 8 billion people, you still know you have a chance. If you work your butt off, you have something to look forward. Even of course, if it's like a full Bitcoin standard world, that's a really interesting comparison. Why did I never heard that?
Good question. Because philosophers aren't paying enough attention to Bitcoin, I guess. And there are, so we don't suggest that every single person obviously will be better off in the Bitcoin world. There are some people, as I mentioned, Paul Krugman and others, who will be worse off. There are also some people who it just doesn't matter. They don't have enough at all. If you're in a small village in some country where you don't have internet access, Bitcoin's probably not going to help you, but it's also not going to harm you. You're not going to be any worse off. And so you just take the number of people who will be better off, figure out how much better off they'll be, figure out how important they are, and then the people who will be harmed, how much they'll be harmed, how important they are. And then you can just do math with that and figure out whether Bitcoin is good for the world overall. And we think, after going through all of the possible ways in which Bitcoin affects all these people, we think it's pretty clear that Bitcoin is good for the world.
Is it then ethically good or not good to pay someone in fiat?
Question. I paid many people in fiat yesterday when I went out to lunch and when I got coffee. So it's complicated. It's good for them because maybe the best thing is to teach them about Bitcoin and, suggest that they start taking Bitcoin, explain who Bitcoin is good for and who they would be helping by participating in this network. But that takes a lot of work, and it's hard to do that with everyone that you buy something from. I know some people do it, good on them. But I'm not sure that participating in the fiat system is ethically wrong, or is morally wrong. I haven't actually thought that much about that. It seems like there are a lot of considerations that go in both directions. And you are, in some sense, off the hook because it was the system that you are born into and you can't change it by yourself. That's consistent with it being morally better to transact in Bitcoin when you can.
Yeah, it's like, for me, it's interesting because from first principles, if I pay someone in Bitcoin, obviously if he doesn't accept Bitcoin, then there's nothing wrong with paying him in fiat because he doesn't even want to get paid in Bitcoin. But if like both options are on the table and you pay someone in Bitcoin, theoretically, this is the money that will gain in value over time. So the moment he gets it, the longer he keeps it, the gift keeps on giving to him. Fiat, it gets devalued from the first minute onward. Obviously, it's not like a minute onwards, but like theoretically, every minute, fiat gets a little bit devalued with the money printing. So just from first principles, if both options are on the table, I feel like it's better to pay someone on more appreciating to pay someone in Bitcoin. And it's super fun because I've completely switched, I think the last few months, to living in Bitcoin, and I still have a bank account. But when I pay something with a bank account, I always keep it at zero. So if I go in the negative, I just pay off with Bitcoin. What I've gone in the negative, I've gone in the positive, then I buy Bitcoin, just keep it at zero. And the interesting thing that happened is that I'm very completely detached now from the Bitcoin price because I earn in Bitcoin. I pay in Bitcoin. It doesn't matter. I'm anyways 100% in it. What do I care if it goes up or down? And then the other interesting thing that happened with, I'm really more looking for what I spend on. It's that it sounds so cliche, but it's really, if you know, if I spend that, I have to spend from my Bitcoin. It's not coming from my bank account. I have to spend that from my Bitcoin stack. And I know it's not logical to have that barrier just because it's a different money. But it really feels different. So I appreciate things more that I buy with Bitcoin than things that I buy with fiat, even though I'm anyways 100% in it. So it shouldn't matter, but there is something in my brain that says like, oh, don't get away your Bitcoin and like spend your fiat. You can spend that. So it's super interesting to think about those things.
Yeah, I think I am slightly different in that it's just really hard around here to pay in Bitcoin, both from a merchant acceptance perspective, but also from the tax reporting perspective. I'm supposed to, for every Bitcoin transaction, calculate the price at which I purchased that Bitcoin, the price at which I sold it for coffee or brisket or whatever, and then pay capital gains tax on that, which is just too difficult to do. So I think for every purchase that I make, I could use this money to buy Bitcoin, or I could use it to buy this other thing. Do I value this other thing as much as I value the Bitcoin that I could get? And theoretically, these two should be the same. Whether you already have the Bitcoin or whether you don't, the opportunity costs are still exactly the same. Psychologically, we know that it's different. There's this well-known cognitive bias called the endowment effect, which is that once you have something, you value it more highly than before you had it. And so already having the Bitcoin and having to trade the Bitcoin, you value the Bitcoin more highly than someone who is making the decision between buying Bitcoin and buying the thing that you're deciding whether or not to buy. So yeah, it's weird that it does make a difference, but I totally believe that it does, and that it's harder once you already have the Bitcoin to get rid of it than it is just to choose not to buy it in the first place.
I struggled really with that bias of like, I don't want to spend from my Bitcoin stack. I separated then my Bitcoin setup for long-term savings and my Bitcoin setup for, those Bitcoin I can spend. And if from those Bitcoin there's something surplus, I can give that to the long-term savings setup. And this allowed me to finally break through from, I don't want to spend my Bitcoin. Like if I earn 70% of my income in Bitcoin, only 10% or something like that I can spend in Bitcoin directly. So naturally I have to sell Bitcoin to pay my fiat bills. But I really struggled with that. And as soon as I said like, okay, there are two different buckets of Bitcoin, I can spend that. It's still Bitcoin, but I allow myself to spend that. It was easier for me if anyone was like, how can I get over that?
Yeah. And I mean, it is reminiscent of what my parents taught me growing up, which is you have your savings account, you have your checking account, spend out of your checking account. Once something goes into your savings account, it stays there. You don't take it out of that, except in, case of major emergency. But in practice, like it's on the same app and I can transfer from the savings account to the checking account in seconds. With Bitcoin, right, you can make it so that your long-term stored Bitcoin, you have to physically travel somewhere to access, one of the private keys to unlock this multi-sig to then spend it. So you can actually force yourself to make it really difficult to spend your savings. I think that I don't know if it's nefarious or not, but our financial system is not set up in such a way as to make it difficult to spend the thing that you should be saving. It's a very spending-oriented economy. And so one of the things that I think is really cool about Bitcoin is that you can actually do this geographically distributed thing. I can send Bitcoin to an address that would take me days to spend from. And I really like that.
Yeah, there's even I mean, you can even time lock it and say like, oh, like that stack I can only access after a year. Even if there's an emergency, I literally can't access that stack. So there's like, it's really fun when money becomes programmable for yourself, and you're like, you can really 100% individually say, that's how I keep it. I mean, if you like, and for self-custody setups, it's also interesting because people have fear of like ranch attacks and like, what if someone comes to my house? Yeah, like keep 80% of your money if you can do that in a I don't know, 6 months time lock. Like you literally can't give it to anyone. So with Bitcoin you have all the possibilities, and I love that. And I'm really wondering a lot, and you probably are the best guest for that. I feel like, what is Bitcoin really changing on an individual level outside of money? Yeah, like of course we might get a little less spendy. We have sound money, sovereignty rights and stuff like that. But do you think there's something changing on our social side of things?
I think so. Social and political side of things. So I think on the political side of things, this is just starting, but I think will increase dramatically as it gets easier and easier to access Bitcoin. As more people have it and are willing to sell it peer-to-peer, the competitors to Bitcoin, specifically fiat currencies issued by governments, and especially as we're seeing now being developed, central bank digital currencies, have to reckon with the fact that people have other options, and that one of these options, Bitcoin, is really popular and really good and does a lot of things really well. And they know that people can opt into Bitcoin at any time. And so if you make your central bank digital currency not private, if you allow backdoors to confiscate people's money from their accounts, you sort of put destruction times on the coins so that if the person doesn't spend them, they lose them, that sort of thing. People just aren't going to use it because they have another option that's Bitcoin. And that option has proven impossible to root out and get rid of. On the social level, I think it does allow this peer-to-peer transactions. In a lot of ways, though, Bitcoin is like cash in that sense. You can still buy things at farmers markets in cash. I do that all the time. So I'm not sure that aspect of transaction is changing that much on an individual social or psychological level. So I'd have to think a little bit more about how, I mean, clearly one thing that's happening is there are communities that are being built around their understanding and appreciation of Bitcoin. So you see these Bitcoin circular economies popping up in El Salvador, in Brazil, in Bangkok, and other places where groups of people just agree to transact in exclusively in Bitcoin. And that brings a certain amount of like social cohesion to those groups in ways that you'd obviously never see with government currencies. Nobody's like, let's start a dollar club and we'll all just pay each other in dollars. And aren't we likely to be friends because of that? But there's some aspect of being interested and involved in Bitcoin that is different.
Let's take a break for a moment and appreciate the beauty that Coin Vigilante has made with the Bitcoin watches. Those watches are the most amazing, the most elegant way of showing that you are a true Bitcoiner. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. And now if you have Bitcoin, I really do hope that you don't have it on exchange. But if you do have it on exchange, I have two ways for you to deal with that. that. The first way is you put it on a hardware wallet. That's the entry for you to get into the self-custody game. I recommend BitBox, Bitcoin only edition for that. It's a super simple and secure way. And if you check out the link in the description, you even get 5% off if you use the code Robin. And the second way is the Bitcoin way. The Bitcoin way is your all-in partner in terms of how to get the most out of your sovereignty. They will personalize for you a self-custody setup that is perfect for your individual situation. They will show you how you can secure your own devices. Securing your Bitcoin is not enough. You also have to keep all your devices secure. One topic that is overlooked often is the inheritance plan. What happens with your Bitcoin once you are no longer here? Do you have a plan for that in place already? And last but not least, if you're in the jurisdictions where you don't feel safe, it's better to get a plan B. For all that, head over to thebitcoinway.com/Robin to get a 30-minute free call. And just a quick side note, I will be for the first time ever speaking at the Bitcoin Prague event in June. It will be absolutely legendary and I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you there. You can get your ticket in the link down in the description of Bitcoin Prague, and very important, use code Robin to get 10% off your ticket. I'm really looking forward seeing you there. It's also I live near Czech, and in Czech there's a different currency than there is in Austria, even though both are in the EU. So like not every EU state actually uses the euro. And it's really interesting when you drive with your car, let's say 3 hours, and all of a sudden you have to spend a different currency. And in Europe, you can drive a few miles, and all of a sudden you spend another different currency. You can literally drive in one day through multiple different currencies, and you have to pay different currencies at different gas stations. And it's just such a beautiful world when we all just use the same money. I really hate when things get complicated, and I go to the holidays, and then they're like, what currency can I use my credit card there, and all those things, and how much do I get charged when I get now in an ATM? It's always the question. I don't know if you have experienced that. If you go to an ATM outside of your country, you're like, how much are they gonna charge me now that I got like $20 out of there? Like they charge me now $5 just to get $20 out. That's a hefty fee. I don't know. I have to hope that Bitcoin kind of connects us more because we use all the same money, and brings us closer to like a singularity of the world. There's like, how is it called? The type 1 civilization, those scales. I forgot the name of it, that brings us a little bit closer to that we can use Bitcoin as the denominator of the world. And this, I hope, and I think so, that actually changes something socially, because all of a sudden those border lines are gonna get a little more, let's say, little less important. You drive over a border, you have the same money, you could work there also remotely, like all those things kind of come to that vision. I don't know how you look at that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Just imagine that you could travel from your country to another country, and you have two options when you get there. You can stay at a hotel and eat at restaurants and whatever that use the money that you already have, or you can stay at a hotel and eat at restaurants and stuff where you have to exchange your money first. All other things being equal, you're always going to just want to be able to come with what you have, use the credit cards you have, use the cash that you have, and then come back. You're not going to want to have to go through these extra hoops of exchanging. And, there's not a lot of places that you can do that with US dollars outside of the US. There are some. Imagine you have Bitcoin. There are going to be communities like this in every country in the world where you can have your Lightning wallet and travel there and pay for hotel, food, excursions, all that stuff, and never having to exchange your Bitcoin for anything else, never having to exchange your government-backed currencies for anything else. Given those options, I think everyone is going to pick everyone who uses Bitcoin is going to pick to travel to the Bitcoin locations. And the more that happens, the more other places see, this area is getting all this tourism because they accept Bitcoin. It's so easy to accept Bitcoin that's going to incentivize more people to accept Bitcoin and so on, till eventually you get to the point where anywhere that you want to go, you can easily find places that accept Bitcoin.
Yeah, and the whole vision of the sovereign individual is getting fulfilled, where the nations all of a sudden have to compete for the brains and the people that they come there. You mentioned previously, I forgot to ask about the Bitcoin Research Institute. What is that, and what are you doing there?
Yeah, the Bitcoin Research Institute is something that is starting in July. Officially launching in July. So we announced it in Vegas or in Nashville, Bitcoin Nashville last July. And as I said, things in academia move really slowly. So we had the gift in place. So it was started with a gift from Mark Casey. And the idea is to create, promote, disseminate academic work on Bitcoin that appears in high impact academic journals that can be cited by journalists and policymakers and used to, show people what Bitcoin is like. One of the things that we found in writing the book, we have something like 600 works cited in the book. And a lot of academic papers on Bitcoin, we found, just contained factual inaccuracies because they were written by people who spent a little bit of time studying Bitcoin and then thought that they had figured something out about it and then wrote a paper. And for some things, you could do this. You can dip your toe into certain topics and learn enough in a couple of months to write a paper and publish it. But it turns out Bitcoin is really complicated. And a lot of these papers, for example, didn't know that there was a difficulty adjustment or didn't know what that meant. So they thought the more transactions there are, the more demand for Bitcoin there is, the more miners will be dedicating energy to it. And so the faster that blocks will come. And it's like, no, Bitcoin doesn't work like that. Blocks can't come faster. They can come faster for a little while, but there's going to be these adjustments. Or people didn't realize that there was a reward for mining blocks outside of transaction fees. Or they didn't know that Bitcoin digital signatures, how they worked. They thought there was just private keys and public addresses, things like that. So in addition to producing research, and incentivizing people to produce good research, people who know about Bitcoin, who understand Bitcoin. We also want to serve as a place where people who understand that they don't know that much about Bitcoin can send their work and it can be evaluated and they can get comments from people who do understand Bitcoin. So this is exactly what happened with this famous paper written by a bunch of undergraduate students at, I think, the University of Hawaii, and then signed on to by their professor, Camilo Mora. So this paper is called "Bitcoin Mining Alone Can or Will Increase Global Climates by 2 degrees centigrade," and they just missed the difficulty adjustment. None of them knew that it happened. So a person like that could send the paper to the Bitcoin Research Institute. I can look it over. If it's too complicated, if there's too much math, right? I'm a philosopher. If there's too much math or computer science or something, I have a network of people that I can send it to that I trust to understand Bitcoin and understand the topic and say, hey, this person is looking for feedback on this paper. Can you just make sure they haven't missed anything, right? It's not an attempt to keep negative papers about Bitcoin from being written or published, but it's an attempt to make sure that they're well-researched and factually accurate, that they don't miss obvious things. So yeah, there's kind of a lot of goals. The final goal is just to provide a community for people who are, grad students, junior faculty who are interested in Bitcoin, but haven't yet written anything about it because they don't see a reason to. So you can incentivize them economically by, funding some of their research and things like that. And we want to do that. But also, I think people who are interested in Bitcoin, as we talked about, have community with other people who are interested in Bitcoin. Right? You and I have never talked before, but we're getting along really well because we both find this thing really interesting. And, if I was in the town that you live in, or if you were here, we would look each other up and go out for a beer and talk about Bitcoin. So if we provide a place where people can come and talk about something they're interested in with other people who are interested in it, we think that will be an incentive to get them involved in the academic Bitcoin community.
I love that. I searched it, but because I was like, it sounds really interesting. Is that paper? But is that Bitcoin?
That's the more et al. Paper, yeah.
Oh gosh, it astonishes me that someone can publish something like that and doesn't know about the difficulty adjustment. Like that is lazy for me, honestly.
Yeah, and if you look at it, so you see the publisher correction. Then you see 3 matters arising. So that was 3 people who before the article was even published, it was published October 29th. On August 28th. Oh, sorry, that's a year later. So a year later, 3 distinct papers came out criticizing various aspects of this paper. And yet you look at the altimetric data, if you look at the citations, this has been cited hundreds and hundreds of times. And journalists who are looking to write about Bitcoin and emissions and things like that, they don't know that they need to look to these matters arising for rebuttal. They just cite this provocative title and consider that good enough. So we think Bitcoiners owe it to the public, to journalists, to policymakers, to present them with factually accurate information about Bitcoin, especially at this time, Bitcoin mining. At different times, different negative aspects of Bitcoin have been seized on. So for a long time, it was criminals. For a little while, it was North Korea. I think the conversation is changing as more data comes out about just how carbon neutral and green Bitcoin mining is, how it's balancing loads in various places, how it's electrifying villages in Kenya, gridless. And so the conversation will switch, and then there will be some other attack vector on Bitcoin. But the more that we can publish accurate information about Bitcoin, the more that can make its way into the public consciousness.
And it's so interesting because of papers like this, it's really hard. Like when someone says, "Oh, studies shown," or like according to that, I'm like who wrote that? and like why did he write that? And it makes the whole field, it sucks away the credibility from all academia. When like there's a few bad apples that write stuff like that is clearly lazy, then this gets the credibility away from most of them, because then people say like, oh, like, okay, this is so wrong, like what else is wrong? And then I'm getting really critical if someone says, oh, because this study has shown this, like show it, like what's in this study. Like I don't trust any studies these days.
Yeah. And in a lot of these studies, I myself am not competent to judge the data set because I'm not schooled in the methods to understand it. But here at the University of Wyoming, we have a School of Energy Resources. And there are people who are experts in, let's say, extraction of oil and oil wells and things like that. And so when I talk about Bitcoin doing methane capture on oil wells, methane that was previously being vented or flared, they sort of know how to study how much Bitcoin is doing that, what the effect on overall methane in the atmosphere is, what the effect on climate change is. And I just didn't go to grad school for that. I don't know the methods. I wouldn't be able to look at a paper and see, oh, this one missed something because they didn't account for this variable. I just don't know what all the variables are. So the bigger that we can build this network, the more academics that we can have getting interested in this and bringing their own areas of specialization to bear. I think the more Bitcoin will benefit, because I do think Bitcoin is good. And I think ultimately the data will show that. I think Bitcoin mining is going to end up contributing to a major reversal in climate change. And I think the data is already beginning to show that. And one of the reasons I think that is because, I talked to Daniel Batten and I talked to Troy Cross, and they explain it to me. I wouldn't be able to necessarily go find that out myself. I think Bitcoin is preventing rolling blackouts in Texas because major Bitcoin miners that are located in Texas are incentivizing grid build out and then turning off in periods of extreme heat or extreme cold, and giving that power back to the network to power air conditioners and heaters. And fewer deaths in Texas, especially of children, will occur during these extreme weather events because of the Bitcoin miners. So I think ultimately the data is going to show the positive effects that Bitcoin has. But we need a lot of people who have a lot of different expertise to work on this. It can't just all be economists and computer scientists who are working on Bitcoin. And I have a Google alert, a Google Scholar alert set for Bitcoin. So every day I get a digest of the Bitcoin papers that have been published in the previous day. And I'll look at the most recent one, hedging Bitcoin, Bitcoin and Ripple trading, Bitcoin performance, Bitcoin deep learning models to estimate price. So much of it is focused on Bitcoin price. And that's really annoying because that, to me, as you're finding, is one of the least interesting things about Bitcoin, is like what its relation to the US dollar is at a point in time and what it will be next week. I just don't care that much. I think Bitcoin is far more important than that. And so I want more papers about these other things coming out.
I guess it's a thing that pre-coiners that are interested in Bitcoin but not quite understand it look at it probably the most, of like, what's the price will be. I know firsthand it's just the best marketing tool. But when you look inside of Bitcoiners, they then don't care about Bitcoin's price because they know they have gone through the cycles. They know the fundamentals, and they are anyways, like, many Bitcoiners that really fully understand Bitcoin have 50% plus of their portfolio, and some lunatics like me 100% in Bitcoin. And then, like, what does the price matter if you're anyways 100%? Like, what action can I take if Bitcoin goes tomorrow at down to like 10K? I cannot do anything. I'm 100% in Bitcoin. If it goes to 10 million, like, I can also not do anything. Maybe I can spend a little bit more, but like, what does this mean? Well, like, maybe the purchasing power is still the same. So it does not really change anything that dramatically.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if you like need a new car and you're thinking of spending half a Bitcoin, and then one day you wake up and you can get that car for 0.2 Bitcoin, maybe you buy it. Oh, the car is a discount. On the other hand, you think, maybe tomorrow it'll be 0.1 Bitcoin. I mean, it's just exactly like using anything else, except that the purchasing power changes faster and changes in both directions, right? The people always ask me when I give talks about Bitcoin, especially at non-Bitcoin audiences. They're like, what about the volatility? Isn't that bad for people? And in one sense, yes, it would be nice if it was more predictable in terms of purchasing power. On the other hand, no, for a couple of reasons. One is the only way to get stability in purchasing power is instability in supply. As you know, if you wanted the purchasing power to remain stable, then as demand goes up, supply has to go up as well in order to smooth all that stuff out. But then supply becomes unpredictable. And one of the cool things about Bitcoin is that the supply is completely predictable. And then the other reason it's not bad is that you might still prefer volatility to the up and downside versus just constant down, which, as you said, is how our fiat currencies work. From the first minute that you get it, it's losing value. And for a time, it's small enough that you don't notice it. But on the longer time horizons, it's not really much up and down. It's occasionally sideways, but with a goal of going down, right? The 2% inflation is the pretty transparent goal that the US Federal Reserve has set. And if inflation is too low, if it's zero or even negative, they're going to try to get it up. They're not going to be content with no inflation. So, yeah, people might prefer volatility to loss, I guess.
It's super interesting. It's an interesting perspective change when you have Bitcoin and you want to save for a house. And let's say you have 0.8 Bitcoin right now, and you don't want to spend more than, let's say, 0.2 Bitcoin. You can just wait till 0.2 Bitcoin buys you a small house for yourself at some point, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years, like whatever the time frame is. In fiat, if you want to save up to a house, you have to constantly get out and get more. So you probably have to take over hours because you have to cover also the cost of your living. And then the thing that you're saving is also getting diminished in value, or like it doesn't get diminished in value, but all the other things compared to that thing is getting higher in value. So you're constantly running behind something. And in Bitcoin, it's kind of like, you can wait for something. And this is an interesting perspective. If you already have, like, let's say 0.5 Bitcoin and you're like, oh, let's wait till I can buy a house from it.
Yeah. I'm content to wait. Yeah, that's a good point.
I can wait for it. How does this all connect to the Bitcoin Research Institute and what you're doing to the upcoming Bitcoin Policy Summit that you have mentioned?
Yeah, so the Bitcoin Policy Summit this will be the third one, and the first 2 years, people a lot of it had to be introductory for everyone. Just not a lot of people who were attending knew about Bitcoin. The goal is to bring in people from relevant regulating agencies, SEC, CFTC. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, things like that, as well as Congress people, senators, staffers, and educate them about Bitcoin. And so my co-authors and I have traditionally, I don't know if it'll be the same this year because we haven't totally settled in the schedule, we've traditionally gone first and talked about why there's a Bitcoin Policy Institute, in addition to a blockchain and a crypto and all these other think tanks. And our job has been explain what sets Bitcoin apart. And then once people understand why Bitcoin is special, it's not like these other projects, then we sort of go into things about regulatory frameworks and mining and things like that. There will be, I'm sure, an increased focus this year on national security issues and how Bitcoin relates to those and geopolitical tensions. But we've outgrown the venue that we've held it in the last 2 years, partly because this administration's interest in Bitcoin has prompted other people to get more interested in it. They need to know what they're talking about. And so, yeah, June 24th or 25th and 26th will be the Bitcoin Policy Summit in Washington, D.C. at the Ronald Reagan building hall, something like that, in DC. And we expect several thousand people to come. And the goal is just to explain Bitcoin as well as we can, explain why people use Bitcoin and what they're hoping to get out of it, and how the government can help people access these individual liberties that come about as a result of Bitcoin.
So it's less in conference with Bitcoiners. It's more about an educational event for policymakers.
Yes. Bitcoiners, people who are already Bitcoiners, are not the audience. They are the people up front. And a lot of people who are Bitcoiners come anyway, because it's a chance to meet other Bitcoiners, talk to them, maybe tell your story to a senator or a staff member of a senator. So we do get a lot of people who come just because they're interested in Bitcoin, who are not, part of the policy making side of things. A lot of journalists come because it's Washington, D.C., and a lot of people who understand Bitcoin are converging in one place with the goal of explaining it.
Yeah, I also saw the agenda and the speaker list for Bitcoin in Las Vegas. I will be there. It's pretty soon. Like it's just like 2 weeks or something like that. There are a lot of senators and a lot of politicians. Like, of course, J.D. Vance, the vice president, and Cynthia Lummis. Those are kind of expected. But like a lot of politicians in general will be there. I was astonished by how many there are.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump's visit to Nashville last year showed politicians what good can come of talking to Bitcoiners in a language that they understand and appreciate. So I think some of these people are clearly just in it for the electoral advantages. Senator Lummis, I've now known for a couple of years. She wrote a very nice blurb for our book. And I believe that she believes many or most or maybe even all of the same things about Bitcoin that I do. And so she's someone who I feel like actually understands it and was advocating for it long before it was politically advantageous. In fact, when it was politically harmful, when it made her seem to a lot of people to be crazy. Why is she focusing on this thing? It doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I have a lot of respect for how consistent she's been about her message around Bitcoin.
I think it's the first time I heard her, was it 2023? The first time she spoke out that I heard her. I don't know, like since when she's doing it, but yeah, she's been the longest one that I've known on this political level.
Yeah, I think it's at least been since 2022, and I think even before that. That's when I first heard her talk about it. And I think it's been even longer than that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. One fun last question. How much do you think Donald Trump understands Bitcoin outside of he needs it for getting voted?
I mean, I'm speculating, but sort of watching the video of him trying to buy a hamburger at PubKey in Bitcoin makes me think that he doesn't really understand it at all. I think his kids might. Eric especially seems to. I think they also understand the value of being Bitcoin adjacent and using Bitcoin to then try to pitch World Liberty Financial and the Trump token and the Melania token. I think they mostly see it as a place where money can be made, where votes can be gained and money can be made. I'd love to be proved wrong about that, but that's my suspicion based on what I know about the Trump family and what they've said publicly. I mean, they're not weighing in on op return limits and things like that. So I don't suspect.
Crazy.
I'd love that. That would show me that they were actually intellectually invested in it. And I'm not convinced that they have Lightning wallets, that they're running nodes at home, that they're in any way, participating in the good of the Bitcoin network for the goods that it brings to other people. I think they're, at least so far, just interested in the goods that it brings to them. And they're not people who need it, right? They're people that can benefit from it, but they don't need it. They were doing fine before. They would be doing fine without them.
Imagine Donald Trump tweeting out like, keep the spam out or something like that.
Anti-ordinals. That'd be amazing.
Gosh, he would, that would go wild in Bitcoin. And outside of Bitcoin, nobody would understand what he actually means.
Yeah.
I have one question to ask each and every one of my guests, and the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
I've written a book with one of my co-authors on the Bitcoin book that's in philosophy of religion. So I write a lot of stuff in metaphysics and philosophy of religion. I, teach a wide variety of courses. Teach philosophy and science fiction, which is one of my favorite courses to teach. Thinking about philosophical concepts like personal identity, time travel, things like that through reading science fiction. I roast coffee in my basement, so we could talk about coffee roasting profiles and things like that. But yeah, most of you can go to bradleyrettler.com, and I have links to all the academic papers that I've written, most of which aren't about Bitcoin. Really, there's like 2 about cryptocurrency, but then the big academic work on Bitcoin is the book, and then the podcasts and things like that. All my other academic stuff is metaphysics and philosophy of religion.
For me, Bitcoin is the closest thing that we can get to time travel.
Yes, but always forward, never backward.
True.
Yeah.
Really cool. We have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asked you the question, should people steer clear of Bitcoin treasury companies and just buy Bitcoin?
So thinking of Bitcoin treasury companies as companies where the value proposition of the company is owning Bitcoin.
I can only speculate, okay. But I would guess Bitcoin treasury companies that just have Bitcoin on their treasuries or balance sheet.
Yeah. Okay. So MicroStrategy, MetaPlanet, things like that. Yeah, I mean, they offer different risk profiles, different return profiles. I don't have advice about that. All I would say is they're not the same thing. Owning a Bitcoin treasury company is not the same as owning Bitcoin. Owning a Bitcoin ETF is not the same as owning Bitcoin. When you own Bitcoin, you can transfer it. You can transact peer to peer with it. You can audit your own amount of it and know that you have it. And none of these are the case with Bitcoin treasury companies or with ETFs. So on the other hand, you don't have to worry about wrench attacks if you own these other things, and you're trusting someone else to manage your access to the Bitcoin that they claim to have. So I would just say they're completely different things. That's like almost like asking, should I own a car or should I own stock in Toyota? It depends. Do you need to drive or do you just want to make money? They're totally different to me. And so if you're just in it for number go up and increasing wealth, then you can think about it that way. Nobody in Zimbabwe is going to confuse these two things. Owning Bitcoin treasury companies is not going to help them at all. Same with people who are, fighting authoritarianism in other countries. So I would just think of them as two completely different things.
I like that answer a lot. Really, really cool. And I 100% agree with you. Before I let you go, it was already really cool. Where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
So I'm on Twitter at RettlerB. You can look up the Bitcoin Research Institute. It's uwyo.edu/Bitcoin. The website for the book is resistance.money. The Bitcoin Policy Institute is btcpolicy.org. And that's probably enough.
There's a .money. I love that. I didn't knew that. Interesting.
Yeah.
Really, really cool.
Andrew Bailey,
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Brad, for taking the time. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.